Hello and welcome to Rembrandt to Richter here at Sotheby's, London, an exhibition and sale spanning some 500 years of history. The experience is a little bit like looking at the entire history of art through the jumbled lens of a kaleidoscope. Now I hope you'll join me on a walking tour through the show, which is on until the day of the sale itself, which is the 28th of July. And I'll be talking to some of Sotheby's experts about some of the most compelling objects in the sale. Hi, George.
Hello. Welcome.
Shake hands virtually.
Exactly.
What an extraordinary thing this is. A self-portrait by Rembrandt. Now, the very fact of such a thing coming to market strikes me as a bit of an event.
Yes, I think it is. There are only 3 self-portraits by Rembrandt left in private hands. And in fact, as we speak, all 3 of them are in the United Kingdom. Goodness. So it is a great rarity and a great privilege to have this one.
It's a rather extraordinary image. I have the feeling that it's at once public and a bit private. The scale suggests private, but the way in which he's dressed in the sober finery of a Dutch burgher puts in my mind the thought that he's trying to impress somebody. Who's he trying to impress?
Well, he's certainly trying to impress all of us. He's also impressing himself. He's showing himself to be a wealthy, successful, he's 26 years old, young man, about to embark on a career as the greatest portrait painter of the 17th century. He was about to move to Amsterdam. He already partly made the move to become a portrait painter, to meet the huge demand for portraiture, which arrived relatively suddenly in the early 1630s. I think he's a little unsure of himself. I think there's a certain caution in his eyes. And of course, up until this point, he had painted self-portraits, but he'd been a history painter. So he was painting himself in different poses, moods, expressions, surprise, of course, famously in both paintings and etchings. And he suddenly now has to become a sober, highly successful, but sober man.
But in a way, he's playing the part of an artist who is the right kind of artist to paint these rich burghers, but he's not quite sure if he fits the suit, if his face matches, as it were.
I think there's enough confidence in his expression.
Yeah.
I think he's coming to terms, probably a little overawed with what's about to happen, but coming to terms with it. This is one of only 2 self-portraits that he painted where he's formally dressed. And both of them are from this year. The other one that's slightly earlier is in Glasgow.
Oh, interesting.
Only 2. And then, of course, later on he paints portraits of himself in fancy dress for sale. But this is, I think, a manifesto and a declaration of who he is and who you'd better reckon with.
So do you think this would have been on the wall of his studio/workshop so that the rich people he wanted to be his customers would look at it and feel, well, he's obviously a very good painter, but he's also one of us. He's wearing the right gear.
Yes, I think that's quite possible, although that theory has been advanced for 1 or 2 of his later self-portraits as well, even though they weren't formal. There's, of course, another possibility, which is that he painted it to be sent to his to-be betrothed, Saskia, who was the cousin of Hendrik Oudenberg, who was the man with whom he was going to business in Amsterdam, this big move from Leiden to Amsterdam. So possibly to impress not just his future fiancée, but certainly to impress her family and his future business partner.
So a lot of impressing, but I very much like the idea it could have been almost a sort of hand-painted Valentine's card for Saskia.
Yes, it's
lucky Saskia, I say.
It's a lovely idea, and he painted. It's very sketch-like. He painted this incredibly quickly.
Yeah, it has that feeling of immediacy to it.
Yes,
and the signature is wet in wet.
Well,
he's doing everything in a hurry.
Absolutely, but not only that, he painted the background first. He always did this with his portraits and self-portraits. Leaving a reserve for the figure, in this case himself. And only when he'd finished the painting would he then sign it, in this case, wet in wet. So he must have painted it really quickly.
I mean, could it have been done in as little as a day?
I think it could, yeah. A day, 36 hours, something like that.
Fantastic.
Exactly.
Gosh, what a thing. And another portrait over here by, I suppose, the the other candidate, you called Rembrandt the greatest portrait painter of the 17th century. You know, the other Dutch candidate for that accolade would be Frans Hals.
In case I'm wrong, we've got another, and of course Frans Hals, who was from Haarlem and a great Haarlem patriot. Haarlem was a very patriotic city. Was also summoned by Hendrik van Uylenburg to Amsterdam to paint portraits at the same time. More or less the same time as Rembrandt, although he didn't. He painted one and went straight back to Haarlem, where he felt more at home. And I think we see here a man, the subject, the sitter, who's full of confidence and no sense of anxiety about himself or his position. But more than that, we feel this in the way it's painted. There is a complete match between painter and sitter. And look at the way he's painted this. He's painted it, there's always a predominant diagonal in Frans Hals' mature portraits. He was 20 years older than Rembrandt, so he was really established by then. But look, he didn't bother with curves. He's painted it in a series of slashing straight lines. I mean, it's incredibly energetic.
He leaves the brushstrokes visible, I think partly so that you can enjoy his virtuosity. I had a painter friend who's no longer with us, sadly, Howard Hodgkin, modern painter, who said, what I love most about Frans Hals is his "See me dance" the polka brushwork.
Exactly. When he'd first completed this picture, this portrait, it didn't have this hand in it. The black robe and the black cloak goes behind the hand. But you can imagine that it wouldn't quite work without that hand. So having finished it, he then, also very quickly, painted in this hand, which I think brings the picture fully into balance. He then actually had to repair the painted, roughly painted oval.
So all to balance the composition.
Exactly.
It's fantastic.
And he's bursting out of this painted frame.
I like the way that he uses this convention almost, I think, in order to flout it.
Yes.
Place the sitter within the stone circle so that, in fact, he doesn't fit. He's so lifelike that he seems to burst out of you almost think you could, social distancing allowing, you almost think that you could shake his hand.
I think that Frans Hals was so successful partly because he did consistently throughout his life like convention.
Yeah.
I think that's why he was so much appreciated until he was old at least, but why we love him so much now.
Well, thank you so much for chatting about these two things with me.
It's a pleasure.
I'll catch up with you later. Alex. Oh, I keep thinking I should do that, but
not today.
From one kind of portrait to a profoundly different kind of portrait. This is Francis Bacon, and the sitter, if you can call him that, is John Edwards.
That's right.
And when I first saw this picture, I thought immediately, how much I admire Francis Bacon's work from the 1970s. And I was thinking of the George Dyer pictures and the triptychs and so on. And then I looked at the actual data and I realised it's 1986. It's much later than I'd initially thought.
I think that's what stands out about this painting. It is from 1986. It's a study for a portrait of John Edwards. But as you rightly point out, a lot of the motifs that we see in the painting actually look back to those famous black triptychs that he made in the early 70s. Following the death of his other great love, George Dyer, who famously took his own life on the eve of Francis's exhibition at the Grand Palais. So here you have this, this big black aperture, the doorway, which is a step into the beyond. You have the light switch, you have the sort of the pull of the blinds coming down. This incredible sort of Michelangelo-esque form of the shadow painted in fleshy pink, which Bacon described as the soul seeping away. And even the profile of Edwards, which is, definitely Edwards, nonetheless reminds me of some of those great profiles of George Dyer sitting on the bathroom toilet.
Absolutely.
In front of that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I find also what's very strong about this picture, and unusual for a picture from the 80s by Bacon, is this strong connection with the idea of the theatre of the absurd. This idea that life is a stage, but it's a bare stage. It's the stage of Samuel Beckett. We're all waiting for Godot. We live in a kind of existential void. That sense of sort of alienated theatre almost.
I think that there's a lot to be said about the two Irishmen and how they place the figure, the human condition, if you like, within these confined, quite foreboding spaces. And it's definitely, that is why I think Bacon is such a singular artist of the 20th century and really analysing the human condition at that time. For me, the other great thing that stands out about this is this petrol green background, which is a completely unique occurrence in Bacon's oeuvre. And altogether, for me, it just becomes the definitive portrait of Edwards, who really was the great sitter for the last period of his life.
I actually met John Edwards just once. I went to the Moscow opening of Francis Bacon's big retrospective in Russia, and Bacon didn't want to go, so he sent John Edwards as his special envoy. And John Edwards, I was keen to meet him because I wanted to hear the stories, but he had a fear of going to bed on his own, so he decided he was just going to stay up all night drinking and tried to yoke me into it. I didn't stay up all night, but I stayed up long enough to hear some of his tales. And he drank champagne all night. And I said, "Isn't that terribly expensive?" And he said, "Francis's paintings are very expensive."
You can see why the two men got on so well.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I'll see you a little bit later.
Great,
but
thank you.
For now, I must move on into a distinctly, I think, unalienated world, the very polar opposite to Francis Bacon's universe.
Yes.
Here we are. Helena, hi.
With Matisse.
With Matisse.
With Matisse.
So tell me a little bit about this picture. It's a relatively late painting, isn't it?
It's 1942. So at this point he's in Nice, absolutely ensconced in the world of the Mediterranean. So this sort of incredible moment of southern light, rich colours, all comes, to fruition in this marvellous composition. I mean, really quite wonderfully balanced and harmonious.
I love this eau de Nil in half of the checkerboards of the floor. I don't know what the other colour is. Is it aubergine? But the colours are like really vibrant, aren't they?
Yes, so I think that it's the vibrancy of the palette is incredibly distinctive. And what's brilliant about this painting is that combination of the intensity of colour and then the kind of graphic spontaneity. So what I love is the way he's almost drawn the figure. I mean, it's painted, but it's like him handling a charcoal or something. If you think of those great charcoal estampe drawings, it's got that kind of spontaneity and fluidity of line of a great draftsman, but combined here with this amazing jewel-like colour that is so typical of Matisse's work, and it, in a way, heralds what's going to come with the cutouts. You can see that already there with these blocks of colour.
That orange line, that sort of arabesque of the chaise longue or whatever it is that she's sitting in. I mean, that could almost be a cutout.
Absolutely. I mean, she's sitting in this kind of Italian Baroque armchair that became a kind of prop in his studio apartment in Nice. But you can see that he's kind of fantasized about the colour and brought it out into this very, very intense red to complement this aquamarine on the checkerboard floor and to create this kind of juxtapositions and energy, which is just fantastic here.
Yeah.
It's a marvellous example. And of course, you've got this interesting juxtaposition of the two chairs with the figure that looks back to the odalisques of the 20s, and then a kind of still life element on the other chair.
Yeah, it's as if he's drawing together motifs from his past. The collapsed space of the Red Studio is vestigially here, and then there's the figure from all the odalisques, but then there's a still life as well. Yeah. And it's almost as if he's bringing different things together from his memory and combining them in one picture.
Yeah, absolutely. It's the world of Matisse encapsulated here. But,
so what else have we got?
Okay, well, I'd love to, as we're talking Matisse, we should move to the other great giant of 20th century figure painting, which is, of course, Picasso. And that kind of dialogue of Matisse, the colorist, and Picasso, the great graphic and draftsman, is played out in a very interesting way with this completely mesmerizing portrait of Marie-Thérèse. Executed, it's 1931, so it's just 11 years before the Matisse we just looked at. It's just, I have to say, it's my complete favourite in the whole sale. I find it as such an amazing, beautiful work.
It is a very remarkable thing, and it's done. It looks like a drawing, but it's actually done on canvas. It's quite an unusual picture in Picasso's oeuvre.
Exactly, because it's charcoal. But if you look close, you see it's actually on a prepared, primed canvas, like a very fine canvas. And it's interesting, why did he do that? Why didn't he just take a sheet of wove paper, which would have also been a standard format size like that? But I think it gives it a kind of depth and even greater significance, warmth, and it gives it almost like a sort of velvety feel.
Well, the way the charcoal catches on the structure of the linen weave,
creates a different reflection of the light.
It's almost pointilliste. It's almost like Seurat, but it's. I'm very struck by this. I'm very, very struck by this. It's such a strange and obviously for Picasso profound relationship that he could have been driven to something so totally, in the eyes of more or less everybody, outrageous. 55-year-old Picasso, 17-year-old Marie-Thérèse. Yes. I mean, he's lived through the war. The streets of Paris have been filled with young men with broken bodies. He wants health, youth, vitality and life.
Yes.
He's returned to the figure. He's abandoned Cubism with its broken shapes, and he's found this wonder to him, this wonder of a woman.
She's a kind of golden wonder. I mean, here obviously in the monochrome form, but she's almost like a goddess in a way.
She is a goddess.
It definitely makes me think of a sort of beautiful Renaissance idealized drawing, but it's also incredibly immediate and personal and intimate.
No, you're right. She is a bit like a Botticelli, but I think to me she's a sphinx, and she's a drawing on canvas, but she has the feeling of a sculpture.
Yes, it's all there.
It's all there.
The 3-dimension and the 2-dimension combined in this sort of masterful, ingenious, and also incredibly touching and moving work. So absolutely stunning.
And it's 31, so it's
still secret. The affair's still completely secret. Yes, yeah.
But it's also the time of surrealism.
Yeah.
With all its interest in dreams and sleep.
Yes.
And what goes on in the mind when we sleep. And there's something of that in it as well, that Picasso, he's awake, worrying away, working away as usual, but she's asleep. And she's a mystery to him. She's a mystery to him anyway, but when she's asleep, she's even more. She's a double mystery. What's she dreaming of?
Yeah. So you've got these kind of layers of overlapping meaning, absolutely. This extraordinary sort of moment of him dreaming of her, and she's dreaming, and it's all kind of coming together in this very intimate moment.
Yeah. No,
very beautiful.
Very, very unusual as well. So, and I have the idea that these objects are actually from the same one private collection.
Yes.
Is that correct?
So these are the kind of lead top works in a group of about 40 from one private European collection that we're selling as the avant-garde collection over the course of the evening and the day sale. And each in their own way are really masterpieces of their kind. I mean, the Giacometti is incredible. This is 1956-57, so exactly the period when Giacometti was doing his Femme de Venise series, the famous sort of iconic, larger, single female forms. And here, reduced to their essence. I mean, it's interesting your conversation with Alex about the Bacon and existentialism. So Giacometti, another artist obsessed with this in this immediate post-war period.
It feels very much in the same, it's in the same moral universe, if not the same visual universe.
Exactly. In the sense that the focus on the figure in space, the figure throughout time, drawing on the ancient, but also incredibly modern and innovative. It all comes together in this reduced human essence, sort of universal human form.
It is the human being dredged into existence. We give birth astride the grave and all that. But it does, I mean, I think it literally looks back in time, because when Giacometti was involved in the war, I think at a certain point he spent some time recuperating from injuries in a hospital in the Italian town of Volterra, which has the world's greatest collection of Etruscan art. And this really is a sort of excavation in formal terms of the language of Etruscan sculpture.
Well, that's clearly where the roots come from. And then, with that inspiration, he's created something quite a unique language of these very, very distinctive reduced figures. And of course the moulding is incredible here. I mean, it's got a crispness and tension which is just extraordinary.
They sort of seem almost to tremble in space. They look surprisingly good in huge spaces with nothing else on display. You could put this in a paint warehouse with nothing else in it, and it would still actually fill the space with its energy.
Yeah.
And what about this Léger? This is a
1914 Léger Cubist work, also with quite an interesting support because it's all on burlap, which is that very, very thick, raw canvas. And this is from the height of Léger's Cubist moment. I mean, this is the pinnacle, in a way, of his particular unique innovation. So Picasso and Braque had their version of Cubism, and Léger's brings in colour, this very strong reds and blues and greens, and also it brings in kind of elements of kind of mechanical forms, these cylindrical forms that appear to be turning in a sort of almost like a sort of turbocharged dynamic movement. They are very much going to become Léger's iconography even after the First World War.
It makes me think, I don't know, because I know the date's 1914, I can't help thinking First World War thoughts, and I can't help thinking things like silos full of missiles or explosions. But I suppose it, in his mind, it is a still life. But if the flowers are flowers, they feel to me very much as if they're made from rolled steel. Yep. They're not made from biological material. Yep.
Exactly. I mean, that play of the mechanical and the human is very key to Léger, and you see it here working through in the use of form, and also the dynamic, the sense of movement is very strong here. That's great work.
And very, very. It's very bold in its lack of finish in certain places. Mm-hmm. The way that he's just left that, and used so much bare canvas, it has the effect of making the forms that are there. It's almost as if they explode out of it all the more. Yeah. Great. Well, I've now actually got so engrossed in talking to you that I've forgotten where I'm supposed to go next. But yes, I've been reminded. So it's this way. Come with me from one world to another again. I mean, I suppose auction sales are always... Oh, hang on, I've gone wrong. Auction sales are inherently events that bring together unaccustomed bedfellows, but that's all the more true in the case of this one because it crosses so many different categories that are normally kept apart, and given their own different sales. So here we've got Old Master, we've got Impressionist and Modern, we've got Contemporary, and we've got Modern British, which is why I'm here to talk to you, Frances.
Hello.
Barbara Hepworth?
This is Barbara Hepworth. It was conceived actually as a maquette for quite a large-scale commission she had in the mid-1950s from an electronics company. But what's so interesting about it is that it marks quite a radical shift from her carving that she was well known for at the time. And it's actually made out of rolled sheets of metal, laboriously hand cold rolled, and then this wonderful stringing, which really brings quite a melodic quality to it.
It's effectively constructed, or constructivist even, a la Nam Garbo,
exactly.
Rather than modelled.
Exactly.
Big shift.
And it's called cold rolling, where by hand you've got to roll the metal so that it then becomes malleable. She called the series Orpheus, which is quite evocative. He was the legendary sort of musician of Greek mythology.
Well, I suppose it is quite literally lyrical in the sense that it looks like a lyre, Orpheus's signature instrument. It's almost a cross between a work of sculpture and a stringed instrument.
Quite, and I think the beauty of the string is that it does carve out the space, and it does create quite a different effect from her more well-known carvings at the time. And it has a personal side, because the Orpheus story is, of course, one of tragedy, of loss.
Love and loss.
Yeah. And at the time, in the early 50s, her marriage to Ben Nicholson had broken down. She lost her son, and so shortly before this commission, she went on a journey to Greece. It was her first visit to Greece, and she was completely inspired by the colour, the landscape, and of course its ancient history. So I think we see all of that in it.
It's interesting because, as you say, although it's a public commission originally, it feels, perhaps because it is a maquette, it feels very personal. And I certainly think you were right, given the dates. How could she not have been thinking about the collapse of her marriage and the death of her, her son? Terrible. But I mean, the other work of art that we have here is looking back to the beginning of that marriage, isn't it? Is that a portrait of her by Ben?
It is. So it was drawn in 1933. It's quite a special moment because in 1932, Ben and Barbara moved into the same studio in Hampstead, and that became kind of the epicenter of modernism in Britain at the time. They were wildly in love, and I think you can see from the beautiful portrait, her silhouette, her face, these wondrous eyes, that Ben was clearly totally in awe of her, both her beauty but also her talent as a sculptor. And their work during that year is really interwoven with exchange of ideas, and so I think this drawing, it really marks something very important to the rest of sort of modern British history, really.
Yeah, no, it's very interesting, and with the collision of her face seen in profile and her face seen more full on in the mirror, that's a device that the Surrealists quite liked, and in fact it's a device that Picasso liked a great deal. It makes me think a little bit of, the Picasso image of Marie Thérèse that I was looking at just a short while ago. And they're created very, very close in time. And although obviously there's a world of difference between the two images, there's nonetheless a kind of correspondence. You can feel perhaps that there's that spirit of surrealism in the air with its unusual juxtapositions and unusual ways of framing and making images that look almost as if they've been dreamed rather than seen.
I also think both the Picasso and the Ben Nicholson, they're looking at portraiture in a very different way from the traditional sort of formal sitting that you would normally think of as portraiture, but both of them are unique portraits in their own right.
They're almost like soulmate portraits, aren't they? They're not, it's not a portrait of what somebody looks like, it's a portrait of what somebody feels like to you.
Exactly, and they've got this personal depth to them which makes both of them so compelling. Something different?
Yes. Stanley Spencer.
This is Sir Stanley Spencer, sort of the grand old master, if you like, of modern British art. This is an iconic kind of example by him. He's sort of known as painting the absolutely most ordinary subjects. This is just a front garden in a little village in Gloucestershire, but he spots in that ordinary subject something truly extraordinary, something visionary that makes us look at the front garden in an altogether different way. It's as if we're a little sort of bee hovering over the garden, and suddenly the daisies spring out, all these colours, every single blade of grass is sort of seen in a very acute detail.
I think it's interesting you say that about a bee. I think for me, it's the toddler's eye view. It's like the tiny child who's really, the ground is so much closer to them than it is to us, but they're looking and they can see the daisies.
I think that's Spencer's...
the daffodils and the what are these? I've gone blank. These lovely
the primroses.
flowers. Yeah, primroses. And it's a sort of vision of spring. And I wonder, did you say it was done in 1941?
It's 1940.
1940. So again, it's the Second World War is upon us, and I know it's not a subject picture, but to me it feels like Spencer's way of reminding himself and perhaps us that no matter how dark things become, there will be a resurrection of sorts. That spring will come, new life will come. This will all come to an end. It's almost his antidote to looking up to see all the warplanes. You look down.
And
see the flowers.
It's his vision of this is the green and pleasant land that the devastation is to save, I suppose.
Yeah. It has that feeling to me. It's a vision rather than a representation. It's not just a cottage garden, is it? Let's face it.
Absolutely.
It's not just like a patch of ground being used to grow flowers. It's almost as if it's teeming with life. It's something seething about it. You get that in Spencer.
I know, you mentioned surrealism earlier. there's also an air of
Yeah,
surrealism within
definitely.
it, even though it's sort of acutely painted.
but I think it's the surrealism of a religious vision. You can say maybe to be religious is to be a little bit surrealist because you're believing in your visions. But it has that feeling to me, and it's a picture full of hope. Lovely. I should move on. I could stay in front of it for ages, but I'll move on. And I'm actually going to jump into my time machine again, and this time I'm going to go back 1941 to 1750. So yeah, I'm going back nearly 200 years to the world of Bernardo Botto, great Venetian view painter, but he's painting Dresden.
Exactly. He's Canaletto's nephew. Canaletto, the man who immortalized Venice, but Botto makes his own way and moves to the north of Europe and celebrates for eternity these wonderful cities, Dresden, Warsaw, Vienna, and some other cities. But there's something particularly special about this picture. I think in part because the condition is so wonderful. What we see is Dresden as it was in 1758, but this is one of the main buildings, one of the most famous buildings.
The Zwinger.
In Dresden, the Zwinger. But here it's seen from a different angle. This is not a glorification of this Baroque masterpiece. It's a different sort of picture. This great building is set to the side, and I think this is so sophisticated because this is really a celebration of light. This is not about glorifying the city. This is about showing how light hits these wonderful buildings, how it hits the water, how it creates ripples. Of course, using water means that the light effect is doubled because there's suddenly two sources of light.
It's about how the everyday and the ordinary is just as beautiful, perhaps even more beautiful, let's whisper it, than the Royal Palace.
Absolutely.
You know, here's the wonderful Zwinger, but then look at these cascading, flowing pieces of vegetation. I mean, I do love his work, and these broken reflections are just fabulous. I mean, they're almost completely without form. I mean, I don't mean to pay any disrespect to Canaletto, but to me, Botto is on a different level. And except perhaps for the Stonebreaker's Yard in the National Gallery by Canaletto, he never comes close to Botto. I think Botto is just amazing.
Botto had the great advantage that he could learn from and through Canaletto, and then he was able to develop it. But there's,
I love
by
his
no means granted that he was.
I love his mind. You know, the way that he thinks, the way that he depicts. It's very modern. It's almost as if he's learnt something from the camera, but the camera doesn't exist. You know, the idea that you might pay attention to this thing that you're not supposed to look at instead of the thing that you are supposed to look at.
Canaletto, throughout his pictures, included figures going about their day, but they're put into the action. They're not the action itself. And I think here we see something very different.
Yeah.
The anecdotal detail, the anecdotal figures, they're key.
But he's even thought about the swans. You know, one swan has an elevated neck and the other one...
And they're not there just to fill the space. They're swans
central.
going about.
It's almost like the little piece of sunlight in that famous watercolour by Gerhard, The White House. And it's like, it's nothing, but it's there in the middle and it draws your eye, and I think it's an absolutely lovely picture. And I love the sky as well.
To be the court painter and to paint Dresden, but to really focus and concentrate on the moat in front of the main building, shows you that this is an artist, quite apart from his extraordinary level of skill, is an artist who can see beyond his era and his moment in history.
Yeah. I was in Dresden fairly recently, which is a wonderful city, by the way. I recommend a trip to Dresden. And I met a local architectural historian who told me that after the terrible carpet bombing and destruction of Dresden during the Second World War by the Allies, when they went to rebuild the city, they found far more useful than any photographs was the series of paintings, topographical paintings made of Dresden by Botto.
Real documents.
They rebuilt the city from the paintings.
So
yes,
the work of art coming to life.
Yeah.
Something of Pygmalion, yeah.
Well, you think that the city is represented in the paintings, but the city that we now can visit is actually based on these.
Quite. What a lovely way, full circle.
Great, yeah. Well, lovely to see you, and thanks for, just a pleasure to look at that.
It is.
So, where am I next? Where am I going? Louise Bourgeois. I know what I'm looking for. From the cityscape, I am looking for the dreamscape. And here we are. There's something wonderful about coming into this room and seeing this picture. It's a picture by Miro, Juan Miro, and it's one of a series of paintings that I think of as a sort of collective homage to Catalonia. And, well, you know far more about Miro than I do. Tell us a little bit about this particular work. 1927?
It's a 1927 painting. It belongs to a series of pictures which, partly because of this amazing deep ozone blue, which does seem to represent the kind of Catalan sky of his homeland, it stands at the very kind of height of his surrealist career, but moves towards his mastery of abstraction. And actually, it belongs to a series of paintings which are known as dream paintings. And this is because there is a wonderful canvas in the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York, which has got a single great splotch of this blue paint on it. And underneath,
there's an inscription underneath which says, "Ceci est la couleur de mes rêves." This is the colour of my dreams, this blue. My dreams don't have a particular colour,
but I think for Miro they did. I mean, he was a relatively struggling artist in Paris. He was working alongside the surrealists, and actually was so hungry at times that he said he hallucinated, and even this colour made him salivate. And it was a memory of his homeland, a memory of Catalonia. And in these pictures that he draws on a variety of different lyric references. They're not direct representation. This painting is known as the Woman with a Red Hat, and of course we can see in those forms certain figurative elements, but they're really just a subjective, almost a prose poem of abstraction in a subconscious and very freeing style.
Yeah, I mean, 1927. I think you're right when you say that he's between surrealism and abstraction, or that he's pushed, because in a way, if I look at this work of art and I think about what suggestions does it make to the future that the future will accept and take on, I really see a lot of American art coming out of
sort of colour field paintings.
Colour field paintings, or indeed the mobiles of Alexander Calder. I mean, you know, those wonderful mobiles, this could almost be a kind of template for one of those things.
Well, it's extraordinary you say that, because this picture actually belonged to Alexander Calder.
Really?
Yeah. He bought it in the 1960s and had it for the remainder of his life. And in fact, we understand it hung in his house in sort of pride of place. And it has
that is amazing, because actually I saw the picture and I thought of Calder, but the idea that he actually bought it, that's that's pretty strong evidence of influence.
It is. I mean, we know they were very great friends. They were very great friends from the 1930s onwards. Yeah. And as Calder became, a great international artist of acclaim and some wealth as well, he actually chose to acquire the works of his contemporaries. And in particular, I suppose for him, this would be the ultimate trophy, to buy a great dream painting by his friend, and indeed, actually, I would say, a great influence on him.
It's very interesting. I think that's a good case of where the provenance of a painting actually changes or enhances one's perception of it. But it definitely is. It's a different thing because it was owned by Calder, and in a way, it sort of pins down Miro's importance in the history of art.
Yes.
In a very, very direct way. No, fascinating. Well, thank you. We must move on. Yes, we're on our way, from one blue to another blue, and I suppose in a way from one dream to another dream. But the dreamer on this occasion is not Miro, and the blue is not the colour of his dreams. The dreamer is David Hockney, and the blue is the colour of his friend's swimming pool.
Absolutely.
Emma, tell us about this.
Sure.
Unusual picture.
So this is from a series of Hockney's paper pools that he came to do in the late 1970s. And we all know Hockney's amazing paintings from the 1960s, the wonderful images he did of swimming pools starting around 1964 through to The Bigger Splash, which is in the Tate's collection. And so he has a break from that, and then he comes back to America on his way to California in the late 1970s. And he stops off with a friend on his way to California, Ken Tyler, and he experiments with this new medium, this new way of painting that Ken introduces to him, which is using paper pulp. So he's again inspired by the pool once again in Ken Tyler's back garden, and this wonderful width swimming pool you have.
What's the paint medium? If it's paper pulp cut into or looks almost torn into rectangles, what's the actual paint medium? Is it watercolor? It's
actually paper itself that's been dyed. So he would use these big wire meshes and put the paper pulp in it, and sort of in the composition, and then apply dye on top. So he's almost painting with water.
So he's sort of like spreading it
exactly,
around.
Spreading it around, and you get these really abstract passages which do speak to a whole history of 20th century abstraction, especially.
It's almost as if he's sort of playing a little Hockney joke on the idea of abstract art.
Totally.
I think David doesn't actually believe any art is abstract. So if you just took that panel out and looked at it on its own, you'd see an abstraction. But
absolutely,
then,
it looks like a Rothko.
No.
So.
It looks like a Rothko,
it does.
Or a Diebenkorn maybe, or something like that. But then this unequivocal diving board is there to remind you, no, it's a picture of a swimming pool and you can jump in.
It puts you right in the picture as well, so you're like front and center about to dive into the swimming pool, and the color of this work and the size of it as well is just so vibrant and compelling, and it just draws you in, holds your attention.
Yeah. Well, it's nice to have a little swim. It's a hot day. It's a hot day here in London.
Yeah. So also thinking about color and light, Bridget Riley was another artist that was doing a similar thing, thinking about different colors and how they react against each other. And you can see that as well in this painting we have from 1982, which is from her series of Egyptian stripe paintings that she was creating in the early 1980s. Which is here.
So this is Cool Edge. Goodness. It does begin to vibrate quite soon after you fix your eyes on it.
Absolutely. And it's a series of work she was doing after a period of time where she travelled across the globe. So she'd been to many different countries and been impressed upon the different sites and the scenes that she saw there. But it was particularly the colours of Egypt that she saw that really ignited a new passion for using colour in her paintings.
Is it the colours of the tomb paintings?
Exactly, yeah, the colours of the tomb paintings, the effect of the River Nile and the architecture you have in Egypt. And that was something she was really inspired by, and it just kind of launched her into this whole new direction in her painting.
It's interesting, as I've met her a few times, and she's quite often spoken about her ambition to do by other means, in a sense, what the Impressionists and the Post-Impressionists were attempting to do. Namely to capture the sparkle of light on water, in her case the sparkle of sunshine on the Cornish sea that she used to swim in as a child.
Yeah.
And that is the experience that she wishes to evoke. But
totally.
I also find that they have, that if you think about them slightly differently, they almost become evocations of a person's turbulent mood and energy. So they're not necessarily just about the exterior world, they're perhaps about an interior world that is constantly moving and vibrating and shifting and changing. And in that respect, they're not entirely idyllic to me. They can be almost challenging or jarring or dizzy making or...
Totally, I think you get that sense when you first see these pictures, and often when you don't see them in person, if you see them in reproduction, that sense does come across quite strongly. But the longer you spend with these paintings, the more you get used to the composition, the more you see and the more time you can spend with it. She really does sort of paint like how your eye sees, and the way it moves across shapes and colours, the way that colours interact with other colours and make new colours. And that's definitely something that the human eye really does itself.
Well, I've noticed that she's, spent some time with her leading up to the retrospective she had in Edinburgh not that long ago. And she's always very pleased when somebody settles in front of a painting for 5 minutes. That's
Right.
what she thinks is like
Yeah.
the minimum time. You don't look at them as if they're images. You give yourself to them as if they're experiences.
Absolutely.
And they give more back to you if you do that.
Totally.
Great. Well, thank you very much.
Thank you.
I remember Bridget Riley saying to me once, we were in the National Gallery and we were looking at Raphael's wonderful painting of Saint Catherine with these astonishing colours of the drapery that seemed almost to carry the whole meaning of the painting, the whole of its transcendent effect was in these draperies. And Bridget Riley said to me, do you know, I think that drapery is the abstraction of figurative art, and it's been like that since the Renaissance. And that remark's always stuck with me, and I just thought, well, this image, this amazing drapery study,
it's the abstract quality of this work makes it absolutely timeless.
Yeah.
You know, it's one of 16 drawings of this type, which are just drawing of light, shapes, volumes. And it's very interesting, you were talking about the Picasso being on canvas. And this is on fine, finissima tela di lino, how Vasari described this type of drawing.
the finest piece of linen.
When it does credited to the invention, to Leonardo da Vinci.
So just to be absolutely precise about what an amazingly extraordinary thing this is, it's one of 16. Only 16 drapery studies.
Exactly.
That survive from
50
the Renaissance workshop of Andrea del Verrocchio, in which Leonardo da Vinci was a student.
Exactly.
And that these drapery studies are thought, all of them, to have been made as
in
preparatory
case,
work
yeah,
for either paintings, but in this case we know for sculpture, because the sculpture still exists.
Exactly.
Tell us
this is
about the
obviously
sculpture.
the monumental sculpture by Andrea del Verrocchio, one of the most important Renaissance sculpture really of the Renaissance, which is in the facade of Orsa Michele. And
Doubting
obviously
Thomas.
the doubting the incredulity of St. Thomas, and this inner niche, which was designed by Donatello. So that is extraordinary, because in fact the sculpture of Donatello moves to Santa Croce, and Verrocchio, when Donatello dies in 1466, is given this commission, which most probably it lasts almost 20 years of work.
Well,
so it's an enormous.
You know, if you get given a commission that Donatello had, I think you're quite
Yes.
nervous and you want to do your
Well,
best work.
he had to perform because he became the most important artist for the Medici and the Medici court, and that's the moment of Lorenzo il Magnifico.
Yeah.
So it's
So
the
what a
greatest, and he lives up to it actually.
I
In his-
absolutely agree. He's underrated, Andrea. But may I
Well-
ask as well, when it comes to this drapery, how does Vasari say that they actually did it?
Yes,
And
that's
what's
very
actually
interesting. In fact, it is Filarete which start giving us, so in the early 60s, Filarete already describes this technique. So they were dipping a sort of cloth, tele di lino, into plaster, wetted plaster, or some solution of glue, and then make it dry when they were draping this on wooden mannequin. So it's a very difficult process. I don't know how they did
Really
to keep it.
Basically, it's like trying to make a piece
sculpture.
of water still, or
Yes.
like trying to stop time, because what they want to do is they want their piece of drapery, which is abstract and figurative at
Yes.
the same time, they want it to be exactly the same so that they can recreate it either in bronze or
Yes.
in paint.
But is
how do
the-
you make a
But
piece
I
of drapery that's just folded on a human body
You see,
permanent?
what-
This is the only way.
What
I mean,
is important is that painter, sculptor, architect were all active in this bottega. So in a way, the common language of all of them is the drawing. And that is exceptional. So the drawing is really the most ultimate way to, how would you say, profess all your discipline.
Profess. But I think, see, some people may look at this and think it's a drawing of a piece of drapery, but does it have any meaning? Does it? And you see, I would say yes, because this is the drapery of the risen Christ.
Exactly, and with the
and this is the
solidity
drapery. It survives in the actual sculpture, one of the most important sculptures in the world, on the facade of Orsa Micheli. And what does the drapery say? To me, the drapery says, to Thomas and to all of us, it says, yes, Christ is alive. He has come back from the dead.
And he's real,
and he's
with
real.
volumes.
And he's in fact, he's got more mass than the rest of us. I think if that was actually a person, he'd weigh 1,000,000 tons. I mean, it's got this
well,
sense.
it does weigh. And I mean, we've seen it in the Louvre exhibition, you know, well, all around, all this drapery study. It was absolutely fabulous. It's one of the most beautiful sculpture with these deep folds.
Yeah.
And you have to imagine that the Christ is actually seen frontally.
Yeah.
So he actually took the fatigue to study it in every sort of shapes, because obviously, as we know, the back of the Christ is completely hollow.
Yeah.
Yes.
But he studied the drapery enough so
Just
that
to see
that he wants us to believe that it goes all the way around.
Exactly.
Very important.
And that's why it takes such a trouble, I have to say.
Fantastic.
One of the most beautiful work in the world, really.
Yes,
to
absolutely.
survive.
And I think, well, I'm just so pleased to have seen this, because they're very, very, very unusual.
And I have to say, this is only one of two still in private hand. The others are all in major museums.
Yeah.
So it's
amazing that
rare.
they even survive at all.
It's true.
It's a leaf out of history. I think it's
true.
wonderful.
Thank you very much.
Cheers. So, I think we've just about, not quite, but we've come very close to the end of our virtual tour, our grand tour. Rembrandt to Richter is the title, and it wouldn't be complete without the Richter. Alex, hello again. Tell me a little bit about this Richter. It's from 1970?
1970, that's right. It's called Vulcan, fenster. Vulcan are the clouds that you see, and fenster is German for windows. It is one of the largest cloud paintings that he made. And when you see it on this cinematic scale, it's very hard not to think about, you know, the great tradition of German Romantic painting, and Caspar David Friedrich in particular, who we speak about a lot when it comes to Richter, because both men came from Dresden. But at the same time, the prosaicness of the title and these square window frames actually prevent us having that sort of full sense of the sublime. And obviously this is a painting from a photograph. This is not a painting of nature, but nonetheless we feel like we're on the edge of something.
Yeah, no, very much so. I mean, my feeling of I very much like Richter's work from the photorealist phase, but I feel about him in his relationship to the Romantics that there's something problematic about it, that, you know, because the Romantics had been so distorted and twisted and brandished by the Third Reich, and of course that's what Richter's generation wants to distance themselves from. So yes, he loves Friedrich himself, but what's been done to Friedrich has made him have an uneasy relationship with that past. And so it's almost as if he's saying to us, well, I might love the idea of Romanticism, but it's an idea from which I am now separated by history, or by literally in the painting, but by glass. But there's something sort of slightly, or not even slightly, to me, it's the alienated sublime, if there's such a phrase.
I think there's definitely a dealing with the past, and I think also just of the present, what it means to be a painter in the 20th century, in the age of photography, and on into the 21st century. And I think here he's also looking forwards. He'd become famous throughout the 1960s for his grayscale photorealistic paintings, always taken from photographs. By the end of the 60s, he was really looking to evolve his style to become something different. And he was experimenting with different ways to abstraction. And actually the fenster paintings are these grayscale geometric forms of windows, which we see an echo of here. But I think even this, even though in some ways it is inevitably a photorealistic painting, a painting of the sky, which shows his incredible skill as a painter, at the same time, it is a study in abstraction. Clouds, by their very nature, are the most abstract form. And here he is studying them. And this really is a bridge for him to move into abstraction, which becomes, from this point on, a key parallel mode to his photorealistic style.
So for you, it's the beginning of a new beginning. It's not the end. So I'm imagining that when you look at it, you see dawn rather than twilight.
It's definitely, I feel like we're on the edge of something, both, you know, metaphorically and in terms of his own painting style.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Andrew.
And, well, that's it. Thank you very much for joining me on this virtual tour of Rembrandt to Richter. I'm going to leave you now, and here are some closing words from Ollie Barker, the chairman of Sotheby's Europe.
Andrew,
Ollie.
thank you very much indeed. Thank you very much indeed. I really enjoyed following all of those mini interviews around the pictures, and you filled them with such incredible sort of incisive information. Thank you so much. And I hope you've enjoyed it at home. I hope this has been a very informative and educational tour of our exhibition Rembrandt to Richter here at Sotheby's in New Bond Street. The galleries are very much open, and we very much hope that we'll have the opportunity of welcoming you here in person. Our experts are here on the ground. If you would like to come to Sotheby's, we are open daily before the sale next Tuesday, the 28th of July, between 10 o'clock in the morning and 3 o'clock in the afternoon. Alternatively, if you want to come in outside of those hours, please book by appointment. Please look at the website for details specifically on how to do that. But obviously, for those of you who are unable to come in physically, there is still the opportunity to look online where the catalogue is listed directly, as well as also the virtual tour, in fact, which is going to be online as well, which gives viewers, our clients, the best opportunity of walking around and seeing some of these incredible treasures. Now, in addition to this, we also have 4 online sales as well. The idea of this sale is actually to be very much kind of cross categories. So we are doing online sales devoted to Old Master painting, to Impressionist and modern art, also to contemporary art, and of course modern British art as well. There is even the opportunity to use augmented reality on our Sotheby's app. Please try it out to actually superimpose one of the objects here in the galleries onto a wall in your living space as well, and I look forward to doing that, maybe even with this Savile painting behind me, which I've got my arm very much. I think it's an extraordinary object. So on that note, we are delighted to be closing off Sotheby's summer series of sales, which have really been extraordinarily global. We started in Paris, we've been to Geneva, we've been to Hong Kong and New York, and of course now finally rounding off the season here in London. The auction is taking place at 5 p.m. British time on Tuesday the 28th of July. I'll be manning the rostrum there next week. We very much hope that you can join us as well, and we look forward to selling this wonderful, extraordinary range of great objects, Rembrandt to Richter, next Tuesday. Thank you for joining us, and please look at all the details at www.sotheby's.com. Thank you so much.